Right now, somewhere in America, a private company is billing the government for prisoners who do not exist. That's not fraud. It's written into the contract. And it's the reason this industry just had the most profitable year in its history. In a decade when crime fell and fewer people went to prison than at almost any point in 30 years. Most businesses are destroyed when demand for their product drops. This one figured out how to get paid either way. To understand how, you have to stop thinking of a prison as a place that punishes people and start thinking of it as something much simpler, a building full of beds. When you buy a private prison, you are not buying a courthouse with a basement. You are buying that building of beds, and nothing else about it works the way you'd assume. That's the unit, the bed. Your customer is not the person in the bed. Your customer is the government, and the government pays you the same way a hotel gets paid a daily rate, per bed, per night. The industry calls it a per diem. A state, a county, the U.S. Marshals, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement, signs a contract that says, for every person we place in your building, we pay you somewhere between roughly $50 and $150 a day. Multiply that by a few thousand beds, multiply that by 365 nights, and you have your revenue line. Now, on paper, this looks like the worst hotel in the world. Your guests don't want to be there. Your reviews are catastrophic, and your occupancy depends entirely on how many people your government decides to arrest. A hotel that can't control its own occupancy is not an investment. It's a gamble. Except the people who built this industry are not gamblers. They are accountants. And they solved the occupancy problem with one clause that quietly rewired the incentives of American justice. It's called an occupancy guarantee. The people who hate it call it a lockup quota, or, more memorably, a low crime tax. Here is how it works. When the government signs the contract, it doesn't just agree to pay you per occupied bed. It agrees to keep the building full, and if it can't, it pays you anyway. A typical guarantee sits around 90%. So if your prison has 1,000 beds and only 700 people are sent to it, the state doesn't pay for 700. It pays for 900. You bill the government for 200 human beings who do not exist. Read that again, because it inverts everything. In a normal business, empty inventory is your loss. In this business, empty inventory is the government's loss and your guaranteed income. Crime going down is supposed to be the thing that destroys a prison company. The occupancy guarantee turns it into a line item the taxpayer covers. When researchers pulled the actual contracts, they found these clauses in about 2/3 of them, guarantees ranging from 80% all the way to 100%. In several states, the contract legally obligated the government to keep the prison completely full or write a check for the difference. One state quietly paid millions for empty beds during a period when its crime rate was dropping. And in 2012, the largest operator went a step further. It mailed a letter to the governors of 48 states. The offer: we will buy your public prisons from you in cash and run them for you. In exchange, you sign a 20-year contract and you guarantee us 90% occupancy for all 20 of those years. Think about what that letter is actually asking for. It is asking a state to promise, in writing, that for the next 2 decades it will keep a fixed percentage of its own citizens behind bars. Not because crime requires it, because the contract does. No governor took the deal, but the offer tells you exactly what this business wants to buy. It doesn't want prisoners. It wants the guarantee of prisoners. Now, the per diem and the guarantee, that's the landlord business. But the most profitable part of a prison is not renting the bed, it's selling things to the person lying in it. A free human being is a terrible customer. They can shop anywhere. An incarcerated human being is the most captive consumer that has ever existed. They cannot leave, cannot comparison shop, cannot say no, and crucially, the person actually paying is not the prisoner. It's their mother on the outside putting money on the books. The two big products are phone calls and commissary. Together, selling phone calls, snacks, and tablet time. To incarcerated people and their families is a multi-billion-dollar industry around $5.5 billion a year, funded almost entirely by money sent in by people who love someone on the inside. And the pricing was, for a long wrong time spectacular. A single 15-minute phone call from certain jails could cost more than $11. A child wanting to say goodnight to their incarcerated parent cost the family roughly 75 cents a minute. The companies that ran these systems, the two biggest, control most of the market, operated as monopolies because each facility signs with exactly one provider. There is no second phone company to switch to. There is one, and it sets the price. Here is the part that makes it elegant. The phone company didn't just charge the families, it shared the money with the facility, a kickback, politely called a site commission. So when the prison chose a phone provider, it wasn't shopping for the cheapest option for families, it was shopping for the provider that would charge families the most and split it. The incentives all point the same direction. Squeeze the people on the outside. That ran for years until the federal government finally capped the rates, dropping that $11 call toward 90 cents and banning the kickbacks, a rare loss for the industry. And then, almost immediately, a new administration's regulators moved to roll the caps back. The rules in this business are not physics, they are weather. They change with whoever is in the building. There is one more revenue stream, and it's the oldest one. The inventory works for you. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolished slavery in 1865, with one exception. Written directly into the text, slavery and involuntary servitude remain legal as a punishment for crime. That clause never went away. It is still load-bearing. Across American prisons, incarcerated people produce somewhere around $11 billion in goods and services every year, making furniture, fighting wildfires, running call centers, processing food, and above all, running the prisons themselves, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the maintenance. For this, they earn on average between 13 and 52 cents an hour. In several states, for most jobs, they earn nothing at all. So account for what's happening here. The building is staffed in large part by the inventory. The product cooks its own meals, scrubs its own floors, and keeps the facility running at a labor cost rounding to zero. There is no other industry on earth where the thing on the shelf also reports for its shift. Now, if you've been keeping score, you might assume this is all built on criminals. It isn't. Of everyone in state and federal prison, only about 8% sit in a privately run facility. As a slice of the actual prison system, the private operators are small. So where did the record profits come from? Not from convicts, from detainees. The fastest growing wing of this industry isn't crime, it's immigration. Of all the people held in immigration detention, roughly 90% are in facilities owned or operated by private prison companies. And the crucial detail, most of these people have not been convicted of anything. Immigration detention is civil, not criminal. They are not serving a sentence. They are simply being held, and you are being paid by the night to hold them. This is the cleaner version of the entire model. No trial required. No sentence to expire, just a daily rate per body, set by a federal agency whose entire job is to fill the beds. And that agency just got the largest budget in its history. A 2025 law routed $45 billion toward immigration detention through the end of the decade, after the detention budget had already ballooned from $20 billion to over $50 in under a decade. The operators responded instantly. One reactivated 4 mothballed facilities, 6,600 beds, and told investors those alone would generate $240 million a year. The other reopened a shuttered family detention center, expected to bring in $180 million annually. And here is the single most revealing moment in this whole story. On an earnings call, investors complained not that too many people were being detained, but that the government wasn't detaining people fast enough. They had expected 100,000 in custody. The number was only around 70,000. To the people who own this business, an underfilled detention system isn't a relief. It's underperformance, a missed quarter. So it sounds bulletproof. Guaranteed occupancy, a captive consumer, free labor, a government customer with an unlimited budget. Where's the catch? The catch is that everything I just described rests on a single foundation, and that foundation is policy. You don't own a building. You own a contract, and a contract is just a promise from a government that the next government can break. One administration signs an order restricting federal use of private prisons, and the stock falls off a cliff. The next administration reverses it, and the stock doubles. The asset didn't change, The weather did. This is a business whose entire valuation is a bet on the political mood of the country, staying exactly cruel enough, not more forgiving, not more humane. If the public ever decides to lock up meaningfully fewer people, the guarantees become unpayable and the buildings become what they physically are: large, empty, very hard to sell. Then there's the operational risk, which is a polite way of describing what happens to the inventory. These facilities are sued constantly. One operator paid out millions in a single year over mistreatment complaints, including more than 20 deaths in its custody. Detainees have died in these buildings, and the company has, in the same week, reported its earnings and described its growth opportunities without mentioning them. On the ledger, a death in custody is a legal expense, a line item. That is the tone the entire industry is written in, and it is the reason it occasionally detonates in court and in the press. And the captive consumer business has its own fragility. The biggest prison telecom company spent the last 2 years buried in debt, defaulting, restructuring, narrowly avoiding bankruptcy. Even a monopoly on a population that cannot hang up on you can be run into the ground. So let's total it up. At the small end, a single county facility on a modest government contract is an unglamorous, reliable little annuity. A few million in revenue, steady, boring, recession-proof because demand for it is set by policy, not the economy. At the top, the two public giants together pulled in over $4.5 billion in revenue last year. One of them turned roughly $2 billion in revenue into nearly $200 million in net profit. The other posted that record-shattering 700% jump, and an executive bought $3 million of his own stock months before the election, a position that more than doubled by spring. The margins work because the cost side barely moves. The land was cheap, the labor is nearly free. The customer is the government, the consumer is captive, and the occupancy is guaranteed by people who don't sit at the table when the contract is signed. Dollar for dollar, it generates returns that look less like real estate and more like a toll road, except the toll is a human being, and the road only gets busier when the country gets harsher. So that's the business. A landlord that gets paid for empty rooms. A store whose customers can't leave and whose bills go to their families. A workforce that earns cents and reports for duty anyway. And a growth chart that points up for exactly one reason: because somewhere a budget was just approved to hold more people. Most industries grow when life gets better. People earn more, they spend more, the chart climbs. This is the one that grows when it gets worse, and the only number on the ledger that never runs out is people.